For decades, the world saw Russian tanks as the ultimate symbol of Moscow's unstoppable power. But on the battlefields of Ukraine, that symbol has turned into a grotesque joke, the turtle tank, a war machine built not to fight, but to survive, running from drones that cost less than a smartphone. With over 4,000 tanks already turned into scrap metal, these steel monsters tell the story of an army that's completely lost its way. Today, you're going to find out how Russia went from a military superpower to a global punchline, and how its tanks became living proof of a superpower in collapse. But to understand how the most feared army of the 20th century became a global laughingstock, we need to look at the modern battlefield. Since the start of the invasion, Russia has lost more than 4,000 confirmed tanks. And the most humiliating part is that most of them weren't destroyed by advanced missiles or devastating airstrikes, but by FPV drones, small, cheap, and operated by soldiers miles away. These drones, equipped with simple explosive charges, cost less than a smartphone. In videos circulating online, you can see the exact moment they dive straight into Russian armor, turning millions of dollars into smoking scrap metal. It's visual proof that the old doctrine of heavy armor and frontal assaults no longer belongs in the 21st century. The war has changed, and with it, a new kind of battle has emerged, the cost asymmetry war. A Ukrainian FPV drone costs on average $500. A Russian T-72 tank, about $2 million. That means that for every destroyed tank, Kiev spends just 0.025% of the value of the machine it eliminates. In other words, Russia is fighting a $2 million war against a $500 one, and it's losing. This financial imbalance is eating the Russian army from the inside out. While Moscow spends millions to produce or repair a single tank, Ukraine assembles hundreds of drones for a fraction of that cost. It's industrial warfare being won through creativity. But the Russians didn't just sit still. Their first attempts at protection came in the form of pure improvisation. Metal cages welded over turrets, extra steel plates, and even coils of barbed wire meant to block incoming drones. They looked like clever solutions, until the first real attack. Footage showed drones easily piercing these defenses, slipping through gaps, exploding inside the tank, and turning every cage into a deadly trap. What was meant to protect ended up trapping the crew inside, with no chance of escape. These failures forced the Kremlin to try something even more bizarre. A new type of armored vehicle, born out of desperation, one that would make the world burst out laughing. Across Ukraine's devastated battlefields, the so-called turtle tanks have appeared. Vehicles so grotesque, they look like something pulled straight out of a Soviet nightmare. These monsters are T-62s, T-72s, and even armored personnel carriers completely covered in sheets of metal welded together, forming a solid shell that encloses the turret, the sides, and even the cannon. From a distance, they look like moving bunkers. Up close, they resemble walking shipping containers. The goal was to make the tanks invulnerable to FPV drone attacks, creating a sort of full-body shield meant to keep explosives from hitting critical points. Some of these tanks have up to 3 layers of improvised armor, reinforced with wire mesh, chains, and steel blocks. Others are fitted with slanted grids designed to deflect incoming kamikaze drones. But what really stands out is the total lack of standardization. Every vehicle is its own patchwork creation. Some soldiers nickname them armored bathtubs. Others call them mobile coffins. Russia calls it adaptation. The rest of the world calls it desperation. In a way, Russian engineers did achieve what they were aiming for. Small drones have a harder time hitting the inside, and in some cases, external explosions don't directly harm the crew. But the price of that protection is so high it nearly wipes out the tank's entire usefulness. Inside these vehicles, the driver can barely see what's ahead. Windows and viewing slits have been reduced to tiny openings with bulletproof glass. Visibility is almost zero. The extra plating adds several tons of weight, slowing the tank down and overloading the engine. And worst of all, in many cases, the turret has been welded to the hull, making rotation impossible. In practice, these machines have turned into mobile bunkers, slow, clumsy, and vulnerable to any coordinated attack. Satellite and Ukrainian drone footage shows that many turtle tanks don't even make it to the front line. They break down, get stuck in the mud, or become perfect artillery targets. And when they do manage to move forward, the inevitable happens. Ukrainians quickly adapted their tactics to deal with these new monsters. FPV drones began targeting the tracks and wheels, disabling the vehicle before finishing it off. Other operators started using drones with larger payloads, powerful enough to pierce even the extra layers of steel. And when all else fails, the artillery steps in, with guided shells and precision munitions raining directly down on the immobilized targets. Every video of a turtle tank exploding has become fuel for global ridicule. Clips flood the internet, shared with laughter, memes, and comparisons to Mad Max vehicles. But behind the humor lies something tragic. Each explosion is the portrait of an army that has lost not just its strength, but its direction. And the most ironic part, these machines, built to endure, ended up becoming the clearest symbol of a force that no longer knows how to fight the war it's in. What began as improvisation has turned into a living metaphor for Russia's military collapse. And just when you think it can't possibly get any worse, it does. After the cages, the iron plates, and the turtle tanks, Russia has taken improvisation to a whole new level. The latest and most bizarre act of desperation was simply removing the cannon. Across the battlefields of Ukraine, tanks began appearing without turrets, without guns, without ammunition, just bare hulls covered in metal plating. From a distance, they look like unfinished vehicles. Up close, they're the portrait of an army that's given up on attacking and is now just trying to survive. The logic behind it sounds almost absurd, but on paper, it makes a kind of sense. The biggest weakness of Russian tanks is the ammunition stored inside the turret. When an FPV drone hits that area, the impact triggers an internal explosion so violent that it blows the entire turret into the air, like the lid of a pressure cooker. So, the engineer's reasoning was simple. If ammunition is the problem, remove the ammunition. If the turret is the weak spot, remove the turret. No turret, no ammunition, and theoretically, no catastrophic explosions. But the cost of this solution is enormous. The tank loses its soul. Without a gun, it can't attack. Without a turret, it can't see. What's left is a heavy, slow, almost blind shell of steel. These vehicles have been nicknamed armored taxis, used only to ferry troops to the front line before retreating. The ultimate symbol of Russian offensive power, the most feared ground weapon of the last century, reduced to a makeshift transport vehicle, all because $500 drones have turned $2 million tanks into relics. And the reason behind this collapse goes far beyond poor strategy. It's built into the very DNA of the Russian tank. The T-72 and nearly every model derived from it share the same fatal flaw, the ammunition carousel, a rotating ring that stores the shells right beneath the crew. It's an efficient design for quick reloading, but it's also a death sentence. When a projectile penetrates the hull and hits the carousel, fire and pressure build up in milliseconds, and the turret is launched sky-high in a violent burst of destruction. It's what soldiers call the jack-in-the-box effect. That's why, in an effort to avoid this explosive fate, the Kremlin is now sending out tanks that are born disarmed. Tanks that don't fight, they just endure. Machines that once symbolized the advance now exist only to protect the retreat. While Russia tries to save its tanks by ripping off turrets and welding sheets of metal, other countries have already shown what a real conversion looks like. One of the best examples comes from Israel, and its name is Achzarit. In the 1980s, after capturing dozens of Soviet T-55s from Arab armies, Israel decided not to scrap them, but to transform them. And they did it with real engineering. The Achzarit was born from those old hulls, but was completely redesigned. It received a new diesel engine, modern electronic systems, and armor so thick it actually surpasses that of many main battle tanks. But the biggest difference isn't in the steel, it's in the philosophy. The Achzarit was designed to protect lives, not just survive explosions. Inside, the crew is surrounded by layers of armor, with evacuation routes and automatic fire suppression systems. The result is an armored personnel carrier capable of entering active combat zones and coming out in one piece. Now compare that to the Russian armored taxi, a project born out of panic, built from scrap and thrown together with no planning. One that strips away its weaponry while sacrificing mobility, visibility, and purpose. The difference between the two is the difference between engineering and desperation. Israel took an old Soviet tank and turned it into a machine built for survival. Russia took a modern tank and turned it into a metal coffin. One represents smart adaptation, the other doctrinal collapse. And on the modern battlefield, that difference isn't just cosmetic, it's the line that separates those who learn from those who keep repeating the same mistakes until they're destroyed. The truth is, we're witnessing the end of an era. For decades, the Russian tank was the ultimate symbol of military power. From the battlefields of World War II to the streets of Grozny, it represented brute force, fear, and dominance over the enemy. But today, what remains of that legacy are rusting shells covered in metal plates, tanks without guns, struggling to survive against drones that cost less than a uniform. These bizarre adaptations aren't signs of creativity or innovation. They're signs of failure, desperation, and improvisation. Every turtle tank, every armored taxi, is a silent confession that the doctrine sustaining the Russian army for 80 years simply doesn't work anymore. The war has changed, and it's changed forever. For the first time in history, dominance on the battlefield no longer depends on who has more tanks, but on who has better algorithms. A soldier with a remote control and a $500 FPV drone can destroy a multi-million-dollar tank. Air power, once the privilege of great nations, has been democratized. Now, any platoon can have its own portable air force. But this revolution raises an unsettling question. If a war tank can be taken out by what is essentially an explosive toy, what is the future of armored warfare? Are tanks doomed to extinction? Or will they be reborn, adapted to a new world where survival depends more on sensors than on steel? While those answers are still being written on the front lines, one image says it all. A Ukrainian soldier stands atop a captured turtle tank, staring at the horizon. Behind him, the twisted metal of a collapsing superpower. In front of him, the future. Silent, digital, and relentless. Because in the end, while Russia improvises, Ukraine innovates. And the only question that remains is simple. Who will win this deadly technological race? While Moscow struggles to survive, China has just realized that the future has already closed in around it. The United States and its allies are building an invisible wall of missiles across the Pacific. Click now on the video appearing on your screen and find out how Australia, armed with the new HIMARS systems, is redefining the balance of military power on the planet. See you there.